I'm Deanne Brown. I'm the Vice President of Sales for South Texas for Structure Home Warranty. We are an insurance-backed third-party warranty program. We're here to help builders and remodelers protect their bottom line. We're so excited to be the 2019 GHBA video sponsor for the Forecast Luncheon. Now stay tuned for what's in store in the Houston housing market, brought to us by Dr. Elliot Eisenberg, the Bowtie Economist.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My gosh, I have a lot to say. So let's get into it, right? And I think the key message I want you to walk away with is we're probably not going to have a recession in 2019. I just don't see it. I don't. It could happen. Sure, anything can happen, right? But I think we're okay, and I'll tell you why. This is important. If you look at the equation on both sides of the room, it's the equation for GDP. This is the goods and services the U.S. produces. There are four terms. The first one is C, household consumption. It will be good. Job growth is decent. Wage growth is good. Take-home pay is growing. Labor markets are tight. Data came out today that was very good on the labor market. That's strong. The third term is G, government spending. Shutdown aside, government spending this year is still quite stimulative. Not as stimulative as it was last year, but still stimulative. The other two terms, corporate investments in plant and equipment, will be okay. And the last term, exports in the bracket, it'll be okay too. So we have two terms that are good and two that are flat. With that, it's very hard to get a recession. It could happen. Things could all go bad. We'll talk about some of them. But I'm pretty confident. As for 2020, I'm less excited. Had I come here a year ago, I would have said you had 18 months till I begin to be nervous about a recession. Now, I'm saying 12 months. It doesn't mean we'll get one in 12 months, but that's when I'm beginning to sort of my eyes and ears start perking up and I'm paying attention. Let's look at the details. This is consumer confidence. And I think it, in a nutshell, gets exactly at where our economy is. We're high, we're doing well, the level is high, but it's come down. Does this coming down mean something awful? No. Look, GDP growth last year was about 3%. This year, GDP growth is going to be somewhere around 2.4%. And next year, it'll be somewhere around 2%. Growth is slowing. Consumer confidence will decline as a result, no surprise. But remember, through 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, GDP growth averaged 2.2% a year. And you can look back at this graph. That's all this time here. We had decent economic growth with consumer confidence not being all that high. So this decline in and of itself is not something to sit here and worry about. Don't perseverate about the last term. Here's another way to look at the same thing. Look here. Look at this. This graph is small business confidence. Is it down? Yeah, it's down. Is it higher, relatively high? Yes. Could it be higher? Of course. Was it much worse before? You better believe it. So what do you focus on? I focus on saying, again, the same thing. Look, through all these years, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, this is Trump's election victory and small business getting all excited about tax cuts and so on. This was decent growth. We're going back to that growth. That's the takeaway message. We had a great year this past year, 18. It was the best year of the economic cycle because we had massive fiscal stimulus, which we'll talk about shortly, all right? But we're still going to have some of that this year, but by next year, it all goes away. And then we're on our own, and we're back at trend growth, which is roughly 2%, maybe 1.9, whatever, right? So how do we spend our money? We're feeling good about ourselves. We go to hotels. We're feeling happy. We go to Vegas. That's a good sign, right? Because we have disposable income. Incomes are going up at the best rate they have. Wage, labor, employment growth is doing really well. Take-home pay is going up by 5.5% on average. Between more people working and everyone getting a pay raise, this is pretty good numbers. So we're going to hotels. Last year in dotted blue was the best year ever. This year's tracking. 2017 had been the best year ever, but 18 broke it, and we're building lots of hotels. So that's good news. We're buying lots of cars. You don't have to buy a car, do you, Mike? No, you can always fix your car. You can always get a used car. You can always buy an old alternator or a used spark plugs or something. I'm not a car guy. But you don't have to do that, right? Interestingly, if you look at this graph, you can see Harvey. Harvey's right here. that blip up, was purchases of cars here in Houston and Galveston after the flooding that took place a couple years ago, right? The numbers have been remarkably steady. They've been at 17 million now for 4 years in a row. The record was 2016. It went down a little bit in 17. It went down a little bit in 18, but it's still at above 17 million. This year, the geniuses in Detroit are saying, you know, maybe we'll get below 17 million. We'll hit 16.9 or 16.8. Is that down? Well, yeah, it's down, but it's still good enough, certainly. So my contention here is that things will slow down a little bit, but things should still be fine. Don't worry about the decline per se. We're still going to have decent GDP growth of well over 2% this year, right? This is spending on renovations, alterations, and repairs in households and houses. And you can see the same story. The total dollars spent are the vertical lines. They're going up nicely. The curve above it is rates of change year over year, 4 quarters. And you see the same thing here. Notice that about a year ago, growth was about 7.5% year over year. Now it's getting down to close to 6.5, 6.2, whatever. Is that less? Yes. Is it bad? No. We're spending a fortune on renovations, alterations, and repairs. The growth is a little slower than it was. Car sales are a little slower than they were last year. Consumer confidence is a little bit down. But we're going to a slower level of GDP growth. You know, I was in Colorado a couple of weeks ago. I said, pot is legal there. I can't, but I'll share the joke anyways. I said, you know, you can take your vape pen. I know you don't know what that is. I know. I saw on TV a picture, you know. So last year, things were really good. You took 4 puffs every day. Now things are just good. You're taking 2 puffs every day. So you're high, just not as high as you were. But it's still good, for God's sake. Don't worry about it, all right? So you put it together, the change in C, the first term in GDP is growing it. This is a good rate. It's 3%. Remember, all those years, 11, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, we were growing at roughly 2.2%. That's these years, here, here, and here. So if we come down from this to down to there, from 3 down to 2.5 or 2.25, I'm not ecstatic, don't get me wrong, but this does not tell us we're on the verge of a recession. And 19 is going to be good because we still have some pleasant fiscal stimulus ahead of us. Now, let's talk about the second term in GDP, corporate investments in plant and equipment. This is oil prices. Oil prices are the squiggly line. They're about 2 months behind in oil prices because that's a better correlation with the rig counts. Oil is an expensive business. You guys in Texas know this better than almost anybody. Looking for oil is expensive. Bringing oil up is expensive from the ground. Fracking it is expensive to get it up, right? Moving it to the coast is expensive. Refining it and cracking it is expensive. When oil prices are high, the U.S. is now the world's biggest producer of oil. We've surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia as the biggest producer. We're the biggest in hydrocarbons for a while. Oil prices go up, the patch goes crazy. Here, the Bakken, the Niobrara, whatever it is, right? Oil prices come down as they have of late. They're going back up again now. That pushes downward pressure. As households, we like lower prices. As investors and the oil patch, we like higher prices. In the old days, lower oil prices was unambiguously good for America. It hurt Texas, but it was good for America. Now, because we're such a large producer, high oil prices aren't nearly the problem they were because all the oil states pick up a lot of money and a lot of exploration and production and building of refineries and so on. Lower is still better nationally, but not so much anymore. This is a huge source of investment in plant and equipment. So we'll see what happens. It's hard to know because everybody lies. Right? Everybody lies. The Russians lie, the Saudis lie, all of OPEC lies, and the American producers lie too. So they tell us this is a great graph. And I don't know who to believe when they tell you things like, oh, you know, our cost of production is like $3 for a barrel. I mean, what are they telling us? Is that what price? Is that the price just to bring up the oil? Is that the price with overhead or the price with land? Who knows? Look here, you see here, this is the Permian, right? This is where the excitement is because the marginal costs of development and pulling oil up and looking for oil are in the Permian are the cheapest anywhere. If the Permian Basin were a country, it would be the third biggest producer in OPEC, the size of Iraq or Iran at 4 million barrels. This is crazy, right? You are a huge oil producer here. This is a huge generator of high paid jobs and a lot of corporate investment in plant and equipment. But oil prices have slacked a little bit of late. So that's not going to help us all that much. Next, this is Dallas Fed manufacturing numbers. This is important because it looks at oil. Oil's included here. And some of this recent decline has no doubt been because of the big drop in oil prices that took place late last year. It's recovered since, but it's still much lower than it was. And where it will go, I don't know. We can talk about it afterwards. Come see me. But no one really knows because, again, the Russians cheat, the Saudis cheat, Iran, now Venezuela. There's a lot of chaos there, and it depends on global growth. But it will slow down growth this year compared to last year. This is total manufacturing activity. And you can look at this graph again, and you can see the same sort of trend where things are good but not as good as they were. For a couple years back here, manufacturers were crazy happy. They were totally ecstatic. They had had a terrible recession in manufacturing, not in the country, but in manufacturing. That's a countrywide recession, the blue bars. Here they're happy, and look what happens of late. Things get worse. They pick up at the very end here. Last month or so, things have improved, but manufacturers are suffering. The dollar's high, hurting exports. Trade's a concern. Interest rates are higher. You add it all up, these are some serious headwinds that manufacturers face, right? So it's not surprising they're not as happy as they were, but they're still well above the flat. That's the horizontal line. You can go into recession as they did here, and that doesn't bring a national recession with you necessarily because manufacturing is only 11% of GDP. It could if it went on with other things. But in and of itself, a recession in manufacturing won't cause a US-wide recession. This is important to note. And at least as importantly, look at the next slide. This is services, 70% of GDP. And look where it is. The blue line is what matters here. It's ridiculously high. So households are happy. Consumer confidence is high but down. Manufacturing is okay, down but above neutral. Services are very happy. This is a decent economy. Last year's everything was good. Soybean sales were spectacular. Now they're weaker because of tariffs. I mean, there are headwinds we face. But fundamentally, we still look pretty good. That's the important thing. Corporate profits are high, but they're not going to grow so fast this year, right? Why not? Because tax reform is done. Last year, we had tax reform at end of 17. So in 2018, taxes were lower than they had been in 17. So corporations could show large increases in corporate profits. That makes firms happy. They want to invest a little more, they feel good, they spend a little more, whatever. Not this coming year, not 19. 19 versus 18 is the same. There's no tax cut anymore. Taxes are the same as they were last year. So you're going to make more money based on better sales and better supply chain management and so on and so forth. But you're not going to get this huge 18, 19, 17% increase in corporate profits. It'll fall to 8 or 9 or whatever. Still good, but not spectacular. Good, but not spectacular. That's like GDP growth. Good, but not as good as it was. That's just the way it is, right? So this is, you put it all together, this is investment in plant, and this is equipment, not plants, but equipment. And you can see here in this graph, this is really interesting. It's so exciting. Look here. This is oil. This decline in corporate investment is largely induced from oil's price decline. Then oil goes back up. There's other things going on too, but oil is a major player here. Oil is a huge percentage of corporate investment in plant and equipment, exploration and production in oil, but you get my point. Pipelines and so on, trains and so on. This is a big deal. So even this year, look, it's not going up, it's flat, it can even fall a little bit. That's okay, I can live with that. Look, the oil price decline here didn't cause a recession. The manufacturing decline that was in recession, manufacturing was in recession, they didn't cause a national recession. So our economy can take some hits. We can have lower oil prices. We can have a manufacturing weakness. We can see car sales decline. That in and of itself isn't going to push us. Now, if we get all of this together and a fiscal policy mistake, and a monetary policy mistake, and China has a hard landing, okay, all bets are off. But that takes a lot of bad news, right? Let's now look at fiscal policy. This is important. So look, this is the key story here. Last year, end of 17, the federal government passes tax cuts in blue. They were ill-timed and unnecessary. We already had a booming economy, but there were political imperatives here. I understand that. Then in February of last year, so almost a year ago to the day, the Democrats and Republicans passed bipartisan spending increases that were also ill-timed and unnecessary. But the Democrats felt left out, and they wanted to also do stupid things, so this was their chance to ride along the stupid train. Okay, so the point is, this was very stimulative. This is the impact on a quarterly basis of the tax cuts and the $200 billion a year increase in spending that was deficit financed for fiscal 18 and 19. The problem is the tax cuts are wearing out because we habituate to them. It's kind of like, again, I don't know this for a fact, but if you snort Coke, I don't know. You know, you need more every time to get the same high, like heroin. I don't really know, but you get the idea. So we've habituated to it. And the 2020 spending increases to $400 billion over 2 years that was passed in early 18 in red, that's going away. It goes from being very stimulative to by 2020 actually being mildly contractionary because of budgetary rules and sequestration, which I don't want to get into now, but come and see me and I'll explain. But if the key thing is look at these bars and say to yourself, look, these bars in 18 were really high. In 19, they're lower, but they're still well above the x-axis, which is neutral. So we're going to have pleasant fiscal stimulus this year from the tax cuts a little bit and the spending increases a little bit. Not as much as it was, but we'll have some. So GDP will go down, but doesn't mean we're going to have a recession. It means we're going to go from roughly 3% growth to say 2.4 or 2.9 to 2.3 or, a meaningful decline, 20%, but nothing to jump up and down and go, oh my God, things are awful. Now, trade. Trade matters. It's a big deal. Trade impacts are already hurting our economy to the tune of 0.2 of a point of GDP. The 10% tax on $200 billion of Chinese stuff, and then the 25% tax on $50 billion and whatever. Come March 1st, they may do more. In the very short run, trade policy scares the pants off of me. It really does. It could drive us into recession. If they increase the taxes on Chinese stuff because they don't make a deal, and if NAFTA 2.0, called USMCA, the North American Free Trade Deal, isn't passed, and it may not, Democrats don't want to give Trump a win here. Trump is threatening to break NAFTA to force the Democrats to sign up to USMCA. But if Trump breaks NAFTA and the Democrats don't sign USMCA, we have no free trade deal across North America. That would be bad. And sometime in March, Trump will decide whether or not to impose tariffs on European automobiles, maybe Japanese automobiles too, for the purpose of national defense. If all those three things that are bad happen, so we impose tariffs on Europe and they reciprocate, we impose tariffs on China more and they reciprocate in some way, non-tariff way, and we break the North American Free Trade Deal, ooh, I'm not a happy guy. But Trump's going to make a deal with the Chinese. Hopefully it's a damn good one, and he squeezes them hard because they deserve to be squeezed because they're rotten, no good players, okay? So I'm with Trump on this one. I hope he makes a good deal. Don't just settle for more soybean sales. Get them to fundamentally change their behavior. No more theft, no more hacking, no more joint ventures, and so on and so forth. They'll resist, but they need a deal as badly as we need a deal because their GDP is declining too. So both of us need the deal. We'll see what happens. I'm crossing my fingers, but be aware, this could go off the rails by April. This could be a very bad story. Assuming it doesn't happen, we don't get a recession, okay? But this is the other problem we face. Global growth is slowing. Europe, China, Japan, and look at Europe. Europe's got problems in Germany. They almost had a recession. Brexit's going to happen maybe. That's very bad. France is teetering on a recession. Italy's always teetering on a recession, right? So there are palpable problems out there. There's trade problems and there's global growth problems, there's some manufacturing concerns, fiscal stimulus is declining, interest rates are high. This is why we're slowing down.
It should not cause a recession this year. It really shouldn't. You put it together, this is GDP growth. As I said before, last year was the best year we've had since the end of the recession in the middle of '09 when it ended, almost 10 years. In 5 months, this becomes the longest recovery in history. Last year was the best year. We probably had 3% growth or 2.9. We're not going to repeat it. We're going to have 2.4 this year, and next year, 2020, probably 2, assuming there are no recessions in there. Otherwise, all bets are off. But we're going to keep slowing and get to our natural rate of growth that we can sustain because of population growth and labor productivity growth. Those are the only two ways GDP grows. More people working, and people who are working more productively. We don't have much of either right now. There's not much labor productivity, and there's not much population growth. So let me tell you something. If you want to make America great, or you want to make America great again, depending on your political persuasion, I'm going to give you a recipe to do it. Take the initiative. Take the bull by the horns. This Sunday, for example, don't watch the Super Bowl. No, stay home, make love. We need people. We're running out of workers. I know it takes 16 years to get a worker, but let's start now. Don't delay. And from what I hear, this making babies can be fun from what I understand. I don't know again, but I hear, it could be fun. So think about it, but we need more people, right? Now, this is concurrent economic data as of like 4 days ago. There's no problem. There's nothing resembling a recession anywhere in sight right now. Nothing. Now, could it go bad? Yes. Is there any indications it is? Nope. And this is the yield curve. A lot of people talk about, will the yield curve invert? So the yield curve looks like this, right? This is years, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30, length of loan, interest rates. Normally the yield curve is upward sloping. The longer you borrow, the more you pay. Makes sense. But sometimes the yield curve inverts. It becomes from a positive slope to a negative slope. When that happens, the blue squiggle goes above the red bar. And every time that happens, with the exception of 1966, here, it's followed, the inversion, the blue above the red, are followed by a gray bar. What are gray bars? Right. So everyone's obsessed about the yield curve inverting. The yield curve doesn't cause the recession. The yield curve is a symptom of the likely onset of the recession. The Fed's not going to raise rates to mechanically invert the yield curve. There's talk in the Fed really carefully. We don't want to do this. We'll talk about Fed policy in a few minutes. But even if we get the inverted yield curve, look at the graph. The recession doesn't come immediately. It takes 6, 8, 10, sometimes 20 months to get the recession. So we get a yield curve inversion in, say, June or July, and a recession comes in early to mid-2020. Okay, I hope not. I don't think it doesn't have to, but it could. But that means 2019's okay. That's what I'm telling you. Even if we get an inverted yield curve in April or May or June, we're not going to have a recession this year. So sit back and enjoy yourself. Now, let's talk about labor markets. Whoa, they're tight. They are friggin' super tight. Look at this. Unemployment rates are at near a 50-year low. Unemployment rate's 3.9%. It hit 3.7 a few months ago for a couple of months and then jumped up. It jumped up. That was good. Why did it jump up? It jumped up because a whole bunch of people who weren't working, guys like, what's your name? Gabe. Guys like Gabe who have no real skills. No noticeable skills. He comes late, he sits in the front row because he couldn't hide in the middle. Yeah, whatever. People say, by God, if Gabe can get a job, good Lord. Ross says, geez, if Gabe can get a job, by God, I can get a job too. So these people who haven't worked in decades say to themselves, gee, unemployment's at a 50-year low, let's work. So we're getting these lazy louses off the sofa into the labor force. Yeah, this is good news. We're happy about this. But look at the blue line. The blue line is a coincidence to leading economic indicator. It's people who lose their jobs, who either get fired or laid off. That number has been below 300,000 for 200 straight weeks. It's a record. It's never been this low for this long, even back in the 60s when our country was a much smaller population. No one's getting fired. If firms were nervous, If firms saw sales declining, if firms were fearful, they'd start to lay off people. Not only they're hiring people, they're not laying anybody off. Things are good out there. They're not quite as good as they were, but they're growing. They're only growing more slowly, but by gosh, they're growing. Look at this number. This is quits. This tells us guys like Rod, how old are you, like 109 or something, but you look good. Guys like Rod who's old and decrepit, and I don't know if he has any skills left, whatever. But he says, you know what? I don't like my employer anymore. I'm quitting. I'm following Johnny Cash's job of take this job and you know what, right? It's remarkable. Quit rates in our economy now are almost as high as they were in the dot-com boom. That's the housing boom. This is today. What's remarkable is the rates today are higher than they were at the housing boom, almost as high as the dot-com boom. But what makes it more remarkable is that we're much older as a country now than we were. The average age of the U.S. has drifted up. We're a country of old people, kind of like you, Phil. Yeah, well, not let alone you. What's your name? Do you know? You forgot. Doesn't even remember his name, he's so old. But these guys are quitting their jobs. They're quitting because they're excited about their prospects. Normally, old people, you would know, they don't even buy green bananas, right? I mean, we're taking risk. This is a great sign. Unemployment is low. People are changing jobs. This is a sign of a healthy market. What's the biggest problem firms have? You can't find workers. This is not an economy in a recession. Now, things can turn around quickly. There's no question. You can look at these graphs and you can look back here and see things are great and not so good, and things are great and then they're not so good. I understand that. But with fiscal stimulus and decent job growth and good wage growth, it's hard to see all this momentum ending overnight. Yeah, trade, all the trade goes bad. The central bank raises rates too quickly. China slows down badly. I mean, okay, we got a recession here. But this would be a lot of things independently happening collectively that's unlikely. How about wages? You'd think wage growth would be spectacular under these conditions. I mean, there's no workers, everybody's looking, things would be great, right? And you'd be totally wrong. This is the data. Wage growth has essentially gone up over the last 10 years on a year-over-year rate from roughly 2% on the far left of the graph, here, right, and there, to 3%. Hardly impressive. How can it be? Unemployment 10 years ago was 10%. It was the worst unemployment we've had, second worst in 70 or 80 or 90 years. And now it's the best in 50. How come it grows so slow? There are a whole bunch of reasons. There are a lot. I'm going to get into only one or two here. And one of them is demographics. The number of boomers retiring is 10 or 11,000 a day. The number of millennials entering the labor force now is about 14,000 a day. The difference is 3,000 times 30 days is 90,000 people a month. That's how much our labor force can grow every month all by itself. We're creating well over that many jobs. We're creating 200,000, 180,000 jobs because the unemployment rate keeps dropping. But how much lower can it go? I'm not sure a lot. So you'd think there'd be great wage growth. But this demographic thing is interesting. These boomers are retiring. They're old. They make good money. Let's say they're making $500,000 a year. But they're being replaced by millennials who are starting out, who are 21. And they're making, let's say, $35,000 or $40,000 a year. You lose $500,000 and you pick up $40,000. 14,000 times you're picking up 35,000, and 11,000 times you're losing $500,000. You're bringing down median or average wages. If you account for that, wage growth is now almost 4%, a very different situation. There's also lack of unions and supply chains and purchasing stuff from abroad and the growth of mega firms and Uber and so on and so forth. But wage growth is better than we think. So we're beginning to see these impacts. Now, how about inflation? We have a good economy. Not great, but good. Household consumption strong. Government spending is decent. Corporate investment will be flat, and net exports will be probably flat to down a little bit. We have very good employment growth. We have better than we think wage growth, but nothing exceptionally good here. There's no question it ain't great. How about inflation? Normally, this late in a cycle, you get lots of inflation. Wages are going up, input prices are going up, the central bank is raising rates, everything's pushing, getting more expensive. Land costs are going up, workers are harder to find, and so on, driving up wages, driving up inflation. But we don't see much wage inflation, do we? And there's not much overall inflation either. This is not the CPI, it's the PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditure Index. It's the Fed's measure. They make policy based on this, not the CPI, and it's lower. All the measures are lower. Blue is headline, including food and energy, and red is core, not food and energy, and the Fed likes to look at red, core, because it bounces around less. You know, food prices bounce up and down because of avian flu, swine, you know, African swine flu, a war in the Middle East, a drought in Australia, a bumper crop in Saskatchewan, you know, just weird junk, right? Red tells us underlying US economic inflationary mojo. And there's not a lot because of China. China is the world's marginal purchaser of everything: nickel, platinum, palladium, copper, aluminum, steel. All these ferrous, non-ferrous metals, semi-precious and precious metals, they're the marginal buyer of everything. And as they slow, their needs for that stuff slow. So you look at Australia, they haven't had a recession in 25 years because all they do is dig themselves up, put themselves on a ship, and ship themselves off to China, right? And then they make stuff, copper or whatever. But China's slowing, and now Australia is starting to slow down too. No recession yet, but they're slowing too. Because China's slowing, commodity prices are slowing. Because of demographics, wages aren't going up very much. You put this together, there's very little inflation in the economy. And therefore, the Fed can take its sweet time raising rates. That's the key thing. Here's one more measure, and this makes me both happy and nervous. Red is how big our economy is at any given day. So on the far left-hand side, you've got numbers like 12 trillion, 14, 15, 16, 18 trillion dollars, the size of our economy. Blue, the smooth blue line, tells you how big our economy can be under ideal conditions, assuming we use land, labor, and capital optimally. Factories are running at the maximal level, unemployment's at the perfect level without causing too much inflation, and so on. What you see is when you have a recession, things get worse, right? When you have a recession, there's a gap gets created, but then the gap goes away. You have a recession, there's a gap, and then it goes away. Big recession, the one of 08, 09, big gap, and it goes away. The good news, we recover from recessions and our economy largely catches up to its trend growth, despite the intervention of the terrible recession. The bad news, however, and this is what makes the Fed stay up at night, look at the graph and look at conditions that exist just before the recession takes place. Look at the colors blue and red and see what changes. Just before the recession hits, what do we see? Red above blue, red above blue. Where are we right now? Red above blue. The Fed is sitting there nervous. Wow, we don't see inflation. We don't see a lot of wage growth. China's slowing, our economy's slowing. And the Fed says maybe we should raise rates. We should raise rates proactively. Should we wait? Should we raise? What should we do? Let's have a look and see what I think is going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen because I can't predict the future any better than you can, of course. But let's think about it. Historically, when the Fed's been in an interest rate rising cycle, what did they do? They raised rates every 6 weeks. The Fed meets every 6 weeks, and every 6 weeks they jack up rates, every time by a quarter point. So over the course of a year, they'd raise rates by 2 full percentage points. You with me? Now, because we're in a different world and our economy's growing slower and there's not that much inflationary pressure because of decades of lack of inflation, they're raising rates once every 3 months. So last year they raised rates 4 times. They raised rates a full 1 percentage point, and everybody's going, whoa, you've got to slow down. You're raising rates way too fast. The Fed can do that now. The Fed can slow down because there's very little inflationary pressures out there right now. Will they return? Possibly. So what's the Fed going to do? I think the Fed does as follows. First, notice this graph. This graph is 40 years of interest rate policies in one graph, perfect correlation. The taller the central bank chair, the higher the interest rates. Paul Volcker was tall, Greenspan was shorter, Bernanke was shorter, Yellen was still shorter. I don't know who this Powell guy is, but he was a policy mistake just because he's too friggin' tall. So what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen, but let's have a look. Right now, Fed funds, the rate banks lend each other on overnight money is between 2.25 and 2.5. I think if we're lucky and things go right, and our economy hums along this year, growth stays up at around 2.3, 2.4, if we're lucky, 2.5. Inflation ticks up a little bit. They raise rates twice. They raise rates twice, we get to 2.875, 50 basis points, half a percentage point. And next year, this is my most optimistic scenario, right? This is most optimistic. We get rates up another quarter point, and we're done. That's it. Our economy cannot withstand higher rates because by 2020, growth will be 2% or less. Last year, 2.9 or 3. This year, 2.3 or 2.4. Next year, 1.9 or 2. A 2% economic growth can't withstand rates of Fed funds rates of 3 and an 8. There's no way. There's no way. They have to start lowering rates. So by then, they start to lower rates, right? Rates go down to 2.875, and they may never get that high to begin with. They may never get much higher than this. They may raise them only once this year. My point is twofold. The first one is rates aren't going to get that high. If you're nervous that rates are going to spiral out of control and we're going to see massively high interest rates, go back, snort some more Coke or something. It's not going to happen. But even though rates may not go up much, there's palpable fear that if they raise rates this much, even this little, even 2 or 3 more times, inappropriately, that could drive us into recession. So the Fed knows it doesn't have much firepower left. It only can raise rates at most 3 times over the next 2 years, and that's the most. And they have to be very careful because they know that if they do it too fast, they will drive us into a recession. So they're very nervous, and they're telling us right now, we're going to see. We're going to wait, we're going to see. So my guess, they raise rates once in June and once in December, and maybe not at all in December. But by doing it in June, they can say, hey, we're paying attention, we're focused, we notice, and then we'll see what happens, and maybe they don't, and we're done with one more hike, maybe none. I think we get at least one, I really do. Now, let's talk about housing. Good Lord. Wow, the housing market's a bit of a mess, right? Here in Texas, better than most places, but it's a bit of a mess. Look at this. We've just had a great year. Our economy's grown by about 3%. Job growth was 2.64 million. Household formation was 1.5 million. Interest rates by historical standards are low. And look at the red line. That's single-fam and multi-fam new construction, not renovation, alteration, repair. We talked about that earlier. This is just new construction. And look at it. It sucks. It's an economic term. How can it be going down? What the hell? This is tragic. It's tragic. Look why. Single fam is the culprit. This is single fam in blue, historically 2.4% of GDP. It springs up to almost 3.5 because of a whole bunch of crazy crap that I'm not going to get into. It then collapses to 0.5% of GDP. It slowly recovers a bit and now is going down again. When you fall from 3.5% of GDP to 0.5% of GDP over a couple of years, that brings huge downward pressure on GDP growth. It clips 1 percentage point off GDP for a couple of years in a row. For 3 years in a row, GDP was being pushed down by 1 percentage point just because of housing. Right now, housing is so small, it doesn't even matter. Housing's not going to drive us into recession. There's no way. It's too tiny. Now, home builders can go into recession. I get that. But not the economy. We're in a very different place than we were. But we need more houses desperately. This is it. Blues, multifam construction. Red, single-fam construction. And green's total. And you can see they're flat to declining. Here we are late in a cycle. Wages are doing the best they have. Household formations finally recovered. Interest rates remain relatively low by historical standards. We have no construction. There are fundamental problems in the housing market, which we'll get into shortly. You can see here, sales were doing nicely until they stopped, and they've been declining of late nationally, right? Inventory of new homes. This is built in red, not sold, but built in red, being built in blue, permitted but not started in green. It's at 325,000. That's the perfect number. That's the right number by historical measures. So the builders are building the right number of homes, but sales are slacking a little bit. And as a result, inventory in months supply has gone way up. I'm not concerned, because job growth is still going to be fine this year. We're not going to get 2.64 million jobs, but we'll get 2 million. We may not get 1.5 million household forms. We may get 1.25. That's still ample enough jobs and enough people to want to buy homes, rent apartments, garden apartments, townhomes, whatever it is they're going to get, right? So we're okay here. We're good here. But the builders aren't as happy as they were. NHB numbers, Wells Fargo numbers, they're less happy than they were. Of course they're less happy than they were. Sales are weaker a little bit. Economy's good, rates are low, sales are weak. Because prices are too high, input costs are too high, land costs are too high, and it's finally adding up. People are finally running out of juice. Look at the price of new homes in red, average, below, in blue, median. They're much higher than they were before the recession began. This was before the last recession in 04, 05, 06. Prices are 33% higher for the average, 25% higher. Here they're a third higher on the median. They're much higher. Incomes haven't gone up. Something has to give. The combination of higher land, higher inputs, higher wages, higher money, it's finally having some impact on the housing market. Regulatory creep has added 20 or 30,000, this is NHB numbers, $20 or $30,000 to the cost of a house. Wage increases in housing are running at almost double the national average. The number of people working in construction, both res and commercial, is still 6 or 7% less than it was 12 years ago at the peak in 2006. Our economy's bigger. We have a lot more workers, but they're not working in friggin' construction. A lot of the Americans who were working in construction have changed jobs and never returned, and a lot of the Mexicans and so on went back to Mexico, and they ain't coming back. So we're literally short workers. We have less workers today than 10, 11 years ago. It's remarkable. And input costs, with the exception of wood, which has collapsed in price, are all a little higher. Steel's a little higher. Aluminum's a little higher. Nothing big. There's no massive inflationary pressures, but there's certainly some pressure. So wages are higher, land is higher, regulations are higher. It's taking its toll. The only good news on the housing front is inventory. Inventory starting to rise. This is not seasonally adjusted. You have to compare month to month. It's actually going up. You can see it here. The dark black line is national inventory. And you can see it was below zero. It was shrinking, growing. And now we're nervous? No. Don't be nervous. This is good news. We've had no inventory. In Seattle or some places, inventory's up 100%. Yeah. It was at 1 week. Now it's 2 weeks. I mean, come on, give me a break. A good market is what, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months? It depends on the market and so on. But these are remarkably low inventory levels. We need them to go up a little bit. We have more inventory people can choose. Prices will go up a little more slowly. And people like me who want to sell their house to buy a new one figure, I'll be able to find something. But I'm giving up. I've given up finding a place. I just stay where I am, and that locks me in and everybody else who wants my house. That's a really bad thing. So this increase in inventory is fine. Go back one slide, please. Go back one slide. Look, the inventory increase here is barely perceptible, quite frankly. You compare that line to that line. It's up a bit. This is a catastrophe, okay? That's a catastrophe. We're not at a catastrophe here. There's nothing even close yet. Call me back in 2 years and we'll see. I don't think we get there. And lending standards are very different than they were as well. But existing home sales are flat to declining. Again, same thing like new. Great economy, great household formation, great job creation, low interest rates, and existing home sales are down. 2016, 17 were better years. I think this year we hit 5.2 million, 5.1 million. We fall by 2 or 3 or 4%, nothing big. Home prices up by 3 or 4 nationally, sales down by 3 or 4, total dollar volume flat. Because prices are relatively high, because there's not enough out there, because the damn builders don't build. But they would love to if they could, but they can't, because the combination of codes and land costs and regulations and permits prevent them from building an affordable home. I'm not saying a subsidized cheap home, just cookie cutter entry-level homes. They can't build them in Houston or St. Louis or Los Angeles or New York or Washington or Detroit. It doesn't matter, they can't do it. Wichita or Wichita Falls, how does that sound? So the good news is because inventories are up, price appreciation's going down. This is good news. Price appreciation was until recently in the ballpark of 7%. Wage increases are 3 or 4. Now, finally, house price appreciation's coming down to the 4% range as fast as wages are going up, which means people who haven't bought a house are now, starting now, are not falling further behind waiting to buy a house. This is good news. A little more inventory, hopefully a little more construction. This would be very helpful. The other thing holding housing back is tax policy. And this is helping you guys in Texas. Tax policy changed in December of 2017. We talked about that. It reduced the amount of state and local taxes you could deduct. Until 2018, you could deduct all your state income taxes and property taxes. Now you can deduct those up to $10,000. That's it. So you live in a high-tax state like New York or New Jersey, the dark green are high-tax states. You're getting screwed. You can't deduct what you could deduct. But in states where there's no income tax, like Texas, you don't care. So people like me who are stinking angry living in a high-tax state like Maryland are saying to myself, oh, I'll move to Florida, thank you very much. It may be hot in summer, I don't care. I'm going to save a fortune in taxes. So some people are moving to places like Texas and Florida and Tennessee and New Hampshire and Washington State and other states because there's no income tax here. This is helping you. It's hurting those dark blue, dark green states and helping you, right? This is aiding and abetting you. Good for you. Nice to be lucky. This is in terms of first-time mortgage apps. As we saw earlier, existing sales have plateaued and declined a little bit. So first-time mortgage apps can't be doing well. But prices have still gone up, so they've made up a little bit. So total dollar volume's held up better, but it's essentially flat, going nowhere. And this is refi activity. So if you have a refi office, buy them a gun, buy them a few bullets, and every day they do Russian roulette. And in a week or two, the whole office is gone and everybody's relieved. You know, because it's stressful when the phone doesn't ring. Rates are higher. There's no refi wave going on now. That's not happening. But there's no crisis in the housing industry. There's no credit bubble. There's no lax lending standards. So even if house prices decline by 5 or 10%, I don't see it happening, but if it does, this will not lead to a cascading house of cards collapse that wrecked our economy last time. Look at FICO scores. The top is the median FICO score, bottom quartile and the bottom 10th or decile. They're flat. This is what caused the housing bust, this massive deterioration in FICO. But there's no deterioration in FICO. We're good to go. Moreover, debt service to disposable personal income. So how good are household finances? They're terrific. There's no indication. This is a sign of a massive problem. There's no problem here. Rates are low and households have been responsible, by and large of late, and they discharged a lot of debt back in the 10, 11, 12 time period. So households are in great fiscal shape now, better than they've ever been. And this problem isn't going away. This problem will persist because demographically, the peak of the millennials is just 27 years old. Home ownership starts to peak out first-time home ownership in the early 30s. We have 5 or 6 more years of really strong demand for housing. I think multifam is going to solve the problem because we can't build enough single fam. It's too expensive. We'll build multifam. But every city will have their own situation. But you can see it here. The biggest millennial group is here, and they'll buy homes. Peak home buying time period by age is there. So 5, 6 years, we have this increasing demand for homes. Hopefully home builders build, but they're slaves to the environment in which they build. And look at here, household formation's been spectacular at 1.5 million. We're not building 1.5 million homes. We're creating 1.5 million households. That's why there's crazy demand for housing. It's ridiculous. We desperately need more homes, and the builders want to do it, but they can't make any money at it. Let's quickly look, and home ownership is going to go up a little bit. We can argue how much, but it's now a little bit too low by historical standards. Let's now quickly look at what's going on here, and then we'll end. So For those of you who don't know where you live, I have conveniently put an arrow over the great state of Texas, okay? You're a great state. My God, you've been an engine for job growth. You have oil. You have relatively inexpensive housing. You have low taxes. That's why you're booming. Look at the last 65 years of growth. You're like ranked 7th or something, and now you're getting ahead of California. They stopped growing, right? You're one of the fastest growing states in the country. Congratulations. And this is continuing up to this day. I'll show you slides in a couple of seconds. In terms of coincident economic indicators, things are fine in Texas right now, and leading economic indicators are fine. So sit back, relax, work a little harder than you did last year. You might make a little bit less growth in your money, but you'll do okay. You'll have to work this year, but you'll be fine. Let's look at what else is going on. Unemployment rates are very low here. This is crazy. Look at Austin in purple in the bottom, below 3%. Everywhere is good here, right? Even no good, stinking El Paso. Anybody from there? Raise your hands. Nobody. We can beat on them senselessly then. Good. This is the 5 biggest cities. El Paso is much smaller, I understand. And they're in the middle of the desert. I get that too. But their unemployment rates have been historically high. Look at them now. They're lower. And look at Houston. This is interesting. Oil collapse is here. And then you recover from the oil collapse, and there's no visible impact here from the flooding. There's none. It's remarkable how fast you recovered, partly because of all the stuff the GHBA obviously did at the time. But you can see it doesn't even register. $80 billion of loss, and you barely see a blip up in the unemployment rate here. Maybe a drop right there, a month or two, and that's it. So you've come down. You're now a little better than El Paso. Of course, you should be better than El Paso. But in another year, if all goes well, you'll be lower, and you'll be closer to San Antonio, Dallas, and Austin, right? This is good. Look here, labor force growth, people working and looking for work. That's really, really good. The only loser here, San Antonio. Don't know what's going on there, but something not so happy there. But even stinking El Paso's doing okay. And the other 3, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, are just rocking it. And Austin is spectacular. Austin, the highest labor force growth on this slide. And the last slide, the lowest unemployment rate. They are really kicking it. This is payroll growth. Who's best again? It's Austin again. And look at Houston. Houston's a great story. So here's the worst of the oil collapse. You had no job growth for a number of years because of the collapse in oil. Oil price improving, boom, you're off to the friggin' races. And again, almost no evidence anywhere of the flooding that took place in late 17 hurricanes. You overcame the hurricanes with alacrity. You overcame the terrible oil price collapse with no growth for a couple of years. Then you're back to the races. You are a very resilient community here. In terms of house prices, Austin, again, king of the castle, but Houston's doing very well behind, then Dallas, then San Antonio, and miserable, no good El Paso. Okay, what are you going to say? In terms of housing starts, you're not building enough. You're just not building enough. And part of this, again, is oil, right? This decline, this oil price decline, that declines, and oil price decline. Single fam is kind of flat, multi-fam is whipsawing around a bit, but it recovers. You need to build more homes. You really do. Home prices are going up too fast. This price appreciation here is because you're not building enough homes. Terrific job growth and payroll growth and employment growth, not enough homes. Look at this. Which state, on the year ending June 30, 18, which state had the biggest increase in population? Texas. You're growing by friggin' leaps and bounds. Build more friggin' houses. It's a WTF moment. What am I going to tell you? So you're a big state. You're the 2nd or 3rd biggest state in the country now. I'm not sure. You bigger than Florida? Florida bigger than you? You're close. You and Florida are like close for 2nd, then 3rd, and then 4th is New York, right? Look at this graph. Look at here. Even by percentage growth, you're number 8. You're the 8th fastest by percentage growth. This is spectacular. Oh, Florida's 21. You're much bigger than Florida. You're much bigger than Florida. Way bigger than Florida. This is great. So where do we end here? Look, first, my name, my cell number, Twitter handle, email address, website, everything. I put out 70 words on the economy. No graphs, no ads, no charts, no links, no photos. You can get it by giving me your business card, going to my website, econ70.com, or texting the word bowtie with no hyphen space, BOWTIE, to the 5-digit number 22828. You'll then be prompted for an email address. You will sign up by text for an email. It will take 20 seconds, the whole thing. You'll hear from me every day till you die. So think hard. The economy is fine. It's going to slow down. It will slow down this year. It will slow down next year. This year, we should avoid a recession. Hopefully, we avoid one in 2022 as well. But with lower growth, the chances of a recession go up, especially late in a cycle. Maybe a trade problem, maybe a manufacturing problem, maybe an interest rate policy mistake or a fiscal policy mistake from Congress. If you get 3 or 4 of those together, global slowing, China hard landing, you get 3 or 4 of those together, all bets are off. I think this year is good. We will see what happens in 2020. And you are in Texas, a fast-growing, low-tax state. Congratulations to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you very, very much.